Ladies and gentlemen, imagine an elite army of 100,000 men, fully mobilized for glory, yet by sunrise, 10,000 lay dead on the field, without a single enemy soldier ever joining the battle. You see, this is the staggering reality of the Battle of Karánsebes, a military catastrophe so profound it challenges everything we know about power and scale. We open on the haunting silence of a mist-covered valley in 1788, where the pride of the Austrian Empire turned its weapons inward. This isn't just a story of a mistake, it's a deep dive into how a superpower can become its own most lethal executioner. Why did 100,000 professional soldiers flee from a shadow? Well, the answer lies not in Ottoman swords, but in a single, misunderstood word. The year was 1788, and the air across the Balkans was thick with the scent of gunpowder and imperial ambition. Emperor Joseph II, leading a massive multi-ethnic force, was determined to crush the Ottoman Empire once and for all. He brought with him the finest artillery of the age, seasoned commanders, and a numerical advantage that should have made victory a mathematical certainty. But on the night of September 17th, near the town of Karánsebes, the Austrian war machine didn't just stall, it detonated from the inside. It began, quite simply, with a scout party of hussars crossing the Timish River to see if the Turkish vanguard was near. Dryly, they found no Turks. Intrigued, instead, they found a group of local travelers selling barrels of schnapps. In the high-stress environment of a campaign, you know, a drink is more than a luxury, it is a momentary escape. Building tension, the hussars began to drink. A group of infantrymen later crossed the river and demanded a share of the alcohol. The cavalrymen refused. A heated argument broke out, a fence was knocked over, and in the darkness, a single shot rang out. That one crack of a pistol was the spark in a powder keg. Someone, caught in the grip of late-night paranoia, screamed the word every soldier feared, "Turks! Turks!" Caustic. The hussars scrambled to their horses, fleeing back toward the main camp. Urgently, the infantry, seeing a mass of cavalry charging toward them in the gloom, assumed the Ottoman light horse had breached their lines. Fierce, they opened fire. Now the chaos was no longer a campfire brawl, it was a kinetic explosion of violence. Analytical and grand. Here we see the fatal flaw of the Austrian Empire. Its diversity was its greatest weakness in a crisis. Abroad and epic, the empire was a mosaic of Germans, Hungarians, Romanians, and Slavs. Urgently, when Austrian officers began shouting, "Halt! Halt!" to restore order, the non-German-speaking soldiers misunderstood the command. Hauntingly and cinematic, in the echoes of the valley and the terror of the night, "Halt" sounded terrifyingly like Allah, the battle cry of the Ottoman Janissaries.
Thinking they were being overrun by the enemy, the main camp disintegrated. Artillery crews, seeing shadows moving through the mist, began lobbing shells into their own ranks. The emperor himself was swept up in the panic, his carriage overturned into a river as he fled the phantom army. By the time the sun rose over the valley, the Ottoman Turks were nowhere to be found. They wouldn't arrive for another 2 days. What they discovered was a field littered with the bodies of 10,000 men, horses, and abandoned supplies, all destroyed by an army that had quite literally conquered itself. The tragedy of Karánsebes teaches us a chilling lesson in strategy. Numbers, gold, and steel are useless without a unified soul. When communication breaks down and fear takes the lead, 100,000 men are not an army. They are merely a mob waiting for a reason to run. This was the ghost of Karánsebes, the realization that the most dangerous enemy is often the one wearing your own uniform. Ladies and gentlemen, to understand the catastrophic fall that was about to unfold, we must first look at the height from which this empire was destined to tumble. You see, in the late 18th century, the Austrian Empire was not merely a state, it was a military titan, a sprawling behemoth that dominated the very heart of Europe. At its helm stood Emperor Joseph II, a man of the Enlightenment who truly believed that through sheer willpower and administrative genius he could forge the ultimate war machine. Under his command, the Hapsburg army was, well, it was a sight to behold. On paper, they were invincible, tens of thousands of infantrymen in pristine white uniforms, cavalry units that could shake the very earth beneath their hooves, and a modernized artillery corps that was, frankly, the envy of the entire continent. They marched toward the Ottoman frontier with the absolute confidence of a predator that had forgotten what it felt like to be the prey. The air was thick with the smell of gun grease and the rhythmic thunder of iron-shod boots. This was a force designed to crush empires, to redraw maps, and to secure the Habsburg legacy in the annals of eternal glory. But beneath the polished brass buttons and the terrifying roar of the heavy cannons lay a hidden systemic fragility. You see, this was not a unified nation in arms, it was a Tower of Babel. The emperor's grand machine was composed of a dizzying mosaic of ethnicities: Germans, Hungarians, Serbs, Italians, Croats, and Romanians. While they all wore the same uniform, they did not speak the same language. In the heat of a parade, sure, the orders of a German officer might be executed with precision. Grimly, but in the chaotic friction of a real campaign, where fear and exhaustion strip away that veneer of discipline, the army was a ticking time bomb of miscommunication. They were a collective of strangers, bound together by nothing more than a shared oath to a distant throne. As this massive column snaked its way through the rugged terrain toward the town of Karánsebes, the illusion of invincibility remained intact. The soldiers believed they were marching toward a decisive victory against the Turks. They had the numbers, they had the steel, they had the backing of a great power. But as night began to fall over the encampment, a single spark of confusion was about to test the structural integrity of this paper titan. And what happened next? Well, it would defy every rule of military logic, proving that even the most disciplined force can lose its collective mind in the blink of an eye. The stage was set, the players were in position. But as the first scouts crossed the river, they were about to encounter an enemy that no amount of training could have prepared them for. Because the most dangerous threat to the Hapsburg Juggernaut wasn't hiding in the shadows of the Ottoman lines. No, it was already standing right in the middle of their own camp. Ladies and gentlemen, the date was September 17th, 1788. The air near the Temish River was thick, with the scent of damp earth and that heavy, metallic smell of an army on the move. This was the Hapsburg Vanguard, the very tip of the spear, comprised of elite hussars, the pride of the imperial cavalry. Their mission was simple: cross the river, scout the terrain, and locate the Ottoman forces. But as they reached the far bank, the horizon remained empty. There were no Turkish banners, no sound of advancing drums, and absolutely no glimmer of scimitars in the moonlight. Instead, the hussars stumbled upon a group of Romany merchants who had set up camp in the tall grass,
And these merchants, well, they were selling something far more dangerous than gunpowder, barrels of potent schnapps. The hussars, exhausted and cold, didn't hesitate. They bought the spirits, dismounted, and began to drink. In their minds, the mission was a success, right? They had cleared the river and found a moment of respite. But the atmosphere shifted when a contingent of infantrymen followed them across the water. Seeing their mounted comrades celebrating, the infantry demanded their fair share of the alcohol. The hussars refused. They grew territorial, even hostile, surrounding the barrels and drawing their sabers to ward off their own infantrymen. What began as a verbal argument quickly descended into a violent, drunken brawl. Fists flew, steel clashed against steel, and the disciplined order of the Hapsburg war machine began to fray at the edges. This was the spark. But you see, the true catastrophe wasn't the fistfight, it was the psychological domino effect that followed. In the pitch black of the night, visibility was zero. Tension was at a breaking point. Every man was already haunted by the terrifying reputation of the Ottoman Janissaries. Suddenly, a sharp crack of a musket echoed through the valley. It was likely an accidental discharge, or perhaps a warning shot fired in the heat of the brawl. But in the ears of a tired, paranoid soldier, it sounded like the start of an execution. Then a voice pierced the chaos, screaming the one word that would seal the fate of 10,000 men. "Turks! Turks!"
The effect was instantaneous. The fog of war didn't just descend, it suffocated them. The hussars bolted for their horses, the infantry scattered into the woods, and the scream for retreat rippled backward toward the main body of the army. In that moment, the Habsburgs weren't fighting an enemy, they were fighting a ghost. And as the panic spread like wildfire across the river, the true horror was only just beginning to take shape. Because, while the Vanguard was running for their lives, the tens of thousands of soldiers waiting in the main camp were about to see a mass of charging horses and screaming men coming straight for them. Ladies and gentlemen, the darkness of that night in 1788 didn't just hide the enemy, it became the enemy. As the panicked vanguard collided with the main camp, the air was thick, with that heavy smell of wet earth and the copper tang of fear. What happened next? Well, it was a masterclass in the absolute collapse of a military machine. In the pitch black, the Habsburg officers realized the situation was spiraling. They did exactly what they were trained to do. They stood their ground and bellowed orders to regain control. "Halt! Halt!" they screamed into the night, desperate to stop the stampede. But here, right here, the diversity of the empire, its pride and its perceived strength, became a death sentence. To the thousands of non-German-speaking soldiers, Serbs, Croats, Wallachians, and Italians, who were already primed for an Ottoman ambush, those German shouts of halt didn't sound like a command to stop. In the echo of the valley and the fog of war, they heard Allah, Allah, the cry of the Ottoman invader. The camp didn't just break, it detonated. Believing the Turks had infiltrated their very heart, the Habsburg cavalry drew their sabers and charged blindly into the dark. See, they weren't hitting Ottoman Janissaries, they were trampling their own infantry, men they had shared bread with just hours before. The infantry, seeing shadows on horseback cutting them down, did the only thing they could. Aggressively, they leveled their muskets and fired volleys into the chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, just imagine the sheer horror of this scene. This was a sophisticated, multi-ethnic war machine literally grinding itself into the dirt. Urgently, the artillery officers, hearing the roar of musketry and the screams of dying men, assumed the camp was being overrun. Stunned, without a clear target, they did the unthinkable. They pivoted their cannons and opened fire on their own tents, sending grape shot tearing through the canvas, and the men huddled inside.
Even the emperor's own guard, the elite protectors of the Hapsburg crown, were consumed by the madness. They didn't see comrades, they saw ghosts and invaders. Firmly, they turned their weapons on their fellow soldiers in a desperate bid for survival. Analytically, it was a linguistic nightmare where every attempt to restore order only added more fuel to the fire. By the time the moon began to dip, the Hapsburg army had achieved what the Ottomans couldn't have dreamed of in their wildest fantasies. Sarcastically, they had conquered themselves through sheer, unadulterated confusion. But as the sun began to peak over the horizon, the true scale of the self-inflicted slaughter was revealed, and the ghost the army had been fighting, well, it was about to be replaced by a very real and very deadly reality.
Because while the Habsburgs were counting their dead, the actual Ottoman army was still miles away, marching toward a victory they hadn't even fought for yet. But, right? How does a superpower explain to the world that it lost 10,000 men to a conversation? 2 days later, as the morning sun rose over a field of self-inflicted slaughter, the actual Ottoman army finally arrived. They did not find a defiant fortress or a disciplined line of Hapsburg infantry waiting to contest the ground. No. Instead, you see, the Grand Vizier and his scouts were met with a sight that defied every law of military logic. They found 10,000 dead and a camp in absolute ruins, all without having fired a single shot. The Ottomans were confused, wandering through a graveyard of an army that had, quite literally, done their work for them. The legacy of Karánsebes remains a chilling realization for any modern leader, you see. Numbers mean nothing without a shared identity and clear communication. It is a haunting testament to the fact that a superpower, armed to the teeth and superior in every measurable metric, can still be brought to its knees by the ghost of its own internal chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, we leave you with the ultimate tactical payoff, the sobering truth that the largest armies are often just one misunderstood word away from total self-destruction. In the heat of the moment, when the fog of war descends, your greatest enemy isn't the one across the valley. No, it is the breakdown of the bond between the men standing next to you. Join us next time as we continue to uncover the secrets of the world's most epic failures. And don't forget to subscribe, right, to maintain your strategic edge.